we've got this map, and we're going to talk about this later, and we can show it again when that's the state of Nevada right there on the left mostly, and Utah's a little bit on the right, and the driving pathway from Las Vegas to Salt Lake with the little town of Milford, and we'll learn more about Milford. Halfway, exactly, that halfway. And it's much closer to the nuclear test site. If you're looking at this map online, if you can see it in this room, the word Las Vegas is down here, and that sign for US 95 is basically the entrance to the test site. They don't have it mapped here. This is a 1957 map or something, right? They didn't start putting it on the public maps till the 90s, I think, or the 80s, more information about where the test site is. But there's that huge space that's a lot of the bombing and gunnery range of the nuclear test site. The test site is only, if those of you that are here now in this room, you can see my pinky is taking up probably 15 or 20% of that space within all those freeways between Las Vegas, Tonopah, et cetera.
How far?
It's 60 miles from Las Vegas.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. Andy, can you hear us okay over there?
Yeah.
Great. Just a review of what we're going to do pretty soon is first thing I'm going to do in a minute is talk a little bit about ICAN for like 1 minute maximum. And then I'll talk about the money and do some screen sharing about the $90 billion the people on the planet are spending through these companies. We'll talk about the money spending because that's what the rest of the world is doing in terms of these days. This week is the focus of nuclear abolition, of where all this freaking money is going and why it's happening, why these companies are doing it. So we'll talk about ICAN and then the money, and then we'll jump into Zelda. It looks like somebody else is joining us on the Zoom right now. And after Zelda talks for about 20 minutes, then we'll have Kelly talk for about 20 minutes. And then we can have some Q&A at the end for Zelda and for Kelly, or for me regarding the money stuff. Kelly is joining us pretty soon. We've started recording, and anybody that's on Zoom has probably heard that voice, recording in progress. And then Zelda, Kelly hasn't seen the picture because he just joined, but here's Zelda, who will be speaking probably about 8 or 9 minutes from now. We'll begin her 20-minute talk. And Doug is also here in Salt Lake City in Mill Creek. It's also being recorded right now. So let me talk for a few minutes about the money of nuclear weapons, because that's what's happening with nuclear abolition groups around the planet these days. This week has been dedicated to talking about where all this money is going to and coming from for nuclear weapons. So I'm going to share this screen right here. This is from the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And they put this little graphic together here, this block of
You can. Your audio is off.
About 31,000. The world spends about $250 million on nukes. Enough to buy 45 million crunch wrap. Enough to hook up 13,000 homes to solar power every single day. And like we all know, nukes are an existential threat. We should stop building them. But the horror to me is the economic inefficiency. And that $91 billion a year is all going to huge arms contractors who are spending that money to lobby for even more money from the government to build more nukes. But luckily, there is a way to fight against this. And if you want to learn how, check out ICAN's Week of Action. Especially if you happen to live in one of these countries. The peace sign. You might associate it with barefoot hippies going groovy, man. But did you know that there's 2 letters hidden in the peace sign? Now, if you don't speak flag, it might be hard to tell, but it's actually N and D. Nuclear disarmament. The campaign to stop building nuclear weapons. And while the anti-nukes movement might seem like a relic of the 60s, turns out it's still pretty important. Because countries around the world are spending nearly $100 billion a year on nukes. Now that's a big number, so the folks at the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons wanted me to break that down for you as part of their Week of Action. So let's do that. That's almost $3,000 per second, enough to vaccinate 17,000 people per second from deadly diseases. That's about 31,000 Crunchwrap Supremes per hour. Every day, the world spends about $250 million on nukes, enough to buy 45 million enough to hook up 13,000 homes to solar power every single day. And like we all know, nukes are an existential threat. We should stop building them. But the horror to me is the economic inefficiency. And that $91 billion a year is all going to huge arms contractors who are spending that money to lobby for even more money from the government to build more nukes. But luckily, there is a way to fight against this. And if you want to learn how, check out ICAN's Week of Action, especially if you happen to live in one of these.
Pegasus, we still can't hear you. We heard the video, but
Obviously, the 9 nuclear states are not signing the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and neither are their comrade nations, such as Germany and the Netherlands. Maybe somebody in this room or on Zoom can say what those other countries are, other than Germany and the Netherlands, that are probably not going to sign because they, like Germany, I said, has our nuclear weapons in it. If anybody has that on their fingertips, we can talk about it later. I'll bring it up at the end to enumerate those if nobody's got that on their tip of their tongue. So anyway,
Yeah.
One more screen share of ideas about. Yeah, so this should be fine. You guys on Zoom can still hear me, right?
Yes.
Great. This is another one of the things from ICAN, just to try to wrap our minds around what that means. $91 billion per year that we could plant 2579, that's trillion. 2,579 billion trees is what that means, which would be really nice. 32 million children could get health care that aren't getting health care right now because the money is being stolen by the nuclear weapons countries. When you look at a global market, a global system of money, why aren't 32 million getting healthcare? Well, you could just swap it out by stopping spending the nuclear weapons money, or hire 1.6 million science teachers. That was just 3 examples. And so that's one of the things that people have been looking at these past few weeks to try to help us understand what it means. And here's some other examples. What I would spend 90 billion a year on. Put your video there. 90 billion could pay for these various things. Here's another one that's really important to me. Healthcare for 32 million low-income children. That's the same one that was before, the healthcare one, that are not getting it. I don't know which countries that is. If you look carefully at that little tag, you figure out where they are. But that's human lives in whatever countries they are. Those 32 million that are not getting it now. So, Zelda, are you ready to talk a little bit about your story? Let's go for 20 minutes with Zelda. Let me stop the screen share. Yes. It's ready to go. Your timer's on. And thank you, Zelda, who's a Utah here. And
Going to have the other lady come on at 5 after?
or whenever your 20 minutes is over. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So just go ahead and click that. And
All
then,
right.
thanks.
I'm Zelda Emerson, and I'm a downwinder. I had a baby born without eyes, and so
This is your book.
I wrote a book about her, and she had many other deformities also. At the time, I was, and I want to say that I'm going to start with the background of my life, of my early life. I was born in Provo, and through the years in 1941, well, I was the oldest of of 3 other siblings at the time. There were 2 others added later. At the time, it was a disgrace to have children, handicapped children in the house. Mom and Dad, well, here we are when we're young. And there's the 4 of us. Anyway, we had friends that had, let me read to you. Mom and Dad kept in touch with Dad's classmate, Ralph Dunn, and his wife, Charlotte. who also had 4 children, one after the other. The oldest child was a boy 1 year older than me. Then they had a girl 1 year younger than me. Following her was the second boy. And then they had one more, but fate was not as kind to them as it was to my folks. And their 4th child, there was something wrong with him. I never saw him because they never brought him home. They put him immediately in the American Fork Training School right after birth. And in those days, that was the accepted societal method of taking care of handicapped children. You did not bring them to their house. In 1941, you remember December, their Japs bombed Pearl Harbor and we went to war. And my folks ended up moving to Milford on the railroad, which is halfway between Salt Lake and Vegas, 200 miles each way. And that's where I grew up and married and met my husband. And we had one boy, and then 16 months later, we had a little girl. But they didn't let me see her.
In the hospital.
That's right. They kept her separate from me. They didn't. They just sent me home, and I never saw my daughter. And I'm skipping here because in 1945, they dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and another one on Nagasaki 3 days later, and the war ended. And so my uncle was able to come home from the war. We were excited about that bomb because it did end the war. I grew up, married my husband, and we were married for a long time. We had 5 children. During that time, they experimented and were bombing, doing testing in Nevada. And these are pictures in my book about the observers. The observers from Milford that went down there all died within a few years. Governor Matheson, our bank president, our mayor, and numerous others. They all died within a few years. Anyway, my second child was born February 5th, 1955. And at the time, they wouldn't let me see her. And let me see if I can see. One day I was very miserable because my milk had come in and didn't feel good. So we had our little boy staying with my family. Herb's family and my family just lived about a block apart. And so anyway, I had not been out of the house since giving birth. So 2 days later, on a beautiful warm Sunday, I decided to go to church. It had been 1 month since Elaine's birth, and I soaked up the rays on the spring sun as I walked to church. When I arrived, everyone greeted me, and I enjoyed seeing friends and townspeople. I don't remember what the meeting's message was about, but while meditating for a quiet period, an idea popped into my head. I would make sure I saw my baby today. As soon as the meeting was over, not saying anything to anyone, I headed straight to the hospital and entered the front door. No one was around, so I walked up the stairs and went straight into the nursery. There was only one baby there, sleeping peacefully. She had cream-colored skin, black hair, and she looked very peaceful. But when I turned her over, oh my goodness, she had a cleft palate. went clear up past her nose. And it was all open. Her mouth was all open through here. And there was a lump under one eye where it should have been, I don't know what it was. And anyway, I looked and I thought, well, her deformities were bad, but not as bad as I thought they were. Not knowing had been the worst torture for me. But the nurses came in. They didn't know what to do. Elaine lay wrapped in a receiving blanket, and so I motioned, could I pick her up? No one stopped me, so I picked her up and cradled her in my arms. Would I be able to take her home someday? They didn't know anything. They were lost for words, and besides, they didn't have any decision-making ability. So I put her down and walked home, and I saw my baby. And the very next day, the doctor's office called and said, you can take your daughter to Primary Children's Hospital in Salt Lake City. You pick her up tomorrow, get on the train. We had passengers trains at that time. Take her up there. And so I picked her up. They had me go to the kitchen, back door. And I picked her up and we went to Salt Lake. And they never gave me a bottle. They never gave me any diapers, nothing. They just gave me the baby all wrapped up. Said, take her up there. So we did. Got in a cab, went up to the hospital, dropped her off. It was at the top of the mountain at the time, you know. And 6 weeks later, well, then we went home. We left her. All they wanted was our insurance papers. So 6 weeks later, my husband and I went back up to see what was going on. No, yeah, 6 weeks later. And so my husband, Herb, and I had just left our daughter, Elaine, sleeping in a hospital bed. This is where the story starts. We didn't know what to expect since our baby born 6 weeks earlier had never spent a single minute at our house. Kind nurse at Primary Children's Medical Center in Salt Lake led us into a large, brightly lit hospital room with beds. And this room was used by volunteer women. Before we had time to sit down, doctors burst through double doors and began questioning me. What happened when you were 6 weeks into your pregnancy? And I answered, nothing. Did something traumatic happen during the 6 week pregnancy? No. Were you in a car wreck? No. Did someone close to you die? No. Did you fall? No. Did any special event cause a mental shock to you? No. Did something happen to you physically? No. And they kept coming with one question after another. So finally, one of the doctors looked at me and he said, well, the reason we're asking is because something must have happened in that 6th week, because at that time the fetus is growing very, very quickly. And when the growth stopped, it stopped, whatever was developing also stopped. Then 6 to 8 hours later, the growth resumed. So another doctor said, let me explain. I asked, what about a brain? And another doctor said, let me explain. When the brain develops, he formed a fist with his hand to visually replicate the brain. Then he continued, the brain completely finishes developing, and afterwards 2 stems come out of it. Bulbs develop on the end of those stems, and those are your eyes. So, because we don't know if her brain finished developing, because she doesn't have any eyes, we know that something happened that caused that problem. She had eyelids, eyelashes, eyebrows, no eyes. And a nurse came into the room, she said it was a breast feeder, and that's how we fed Elaine. And so this book tells about, I'm running out of time already. This book tells about her life and what happened through the years. And we didn't know, we hunted and the whole thing, we just kept, this had happened, that had happened. And well, what caused, what happened, you know? And we never could figure out what happened. I later got a divorce from my husband. We had problems. Verbal abuse turned to physical abuse, and I got a divorce. And so then I was teaching a little boy that was autistic in the school district, and the teacher, first grade teacher, came in and said, go back to school and get a degree and get paid for what you're doing. So I enrolled, and my daughter called from Salt Lake, and she said, why don't you come up here and go to this university? So I did, I transferred. And during my schooling up here, well, Elaine died while I was in Salt Lake. And
At age 30.
she was 30 years old at the time. And she had passed away. And my one son came up to me afterwards, and he said, I think I'm a better person for having known Elaine. That's the way we all felt. So afterwards, I finally felt like, well, maybe I could start dating, and I did. And I went to the symphony and met a fellow. We were sitting next to each other, and during the intermission, we got to talking, and that's how I met my second husband. And then 5 years later, we continued taking the Time magazine. That would have been one of the textbooks at the university. And I picked up, 5 years later, I picked up a thing about Chernobyl. They had a picture of a pig. This black here is dirt. The pig didn't have any eyes.
Born without them.
Yeah, the nuclear, and they blamed it onto the nuclear reaction from Chernobyl. Didn't bother the mother pig, but all the damage went to the one in the gestation period. And I said, that's what it must have happened to my daughter. You cannot see radiation. You cannot smell radiation. You cannot taste radiation. You cannot hear radiation. You cannot feel radiation. And that's what must have happened to me. I'm a downwinder. Well, then we were talking to my girlfriend, who had married a fellow, and he said I was down there. I said, what? He was down in Nevada at the test site. He was over 20 men that tested the wind. If the wind was blowing toward Vegas or California, they could not set off their blasts. They could only set them off if they went north or northeast. Utah, if you go back to that little map that we had right at first, Utah is a ways away, but the wind was blowing from the test site right through here.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we were in the middle of it. My mother developed breast cancer. She got the 50,000 reward. My brother in Heber, he's still alive. He had bladder cancer. He got it. And my brother-in-law just died last year from the effects of it. Both his parents died from it in Beaver. And,
Beaver's another town down there. Yeah.
Yeah, Beaver's in Beaver County.
Yeah.
And it's not a very pleasant subject for me, and I don't want to see more reactors built. That's just my personal choice.
Mhm.
And then there's, I was going through the reality now. I was seeing where since 2022, companies have announced or begun staging 641 projects on this, the Inflation Reduction Act, clean energy. And, I have people say, oh, no, we have to do nuclear. But what are we going to do with the waste?
Mhm.
Nobody's ever figured out what to do with that waste.
That's right.
And so I'm out of time. So, but we can do a lot even on our own. I'm a great one. Conservation begins at home. Turn off the lights, turn off the fans when you leave rooms. We don't need to waste energy just because I have solar power on my house, but we don't need to waste power just because we've got it. Yeah. So, guess that finishes up my talk.
Thank you, Zelda, and we'll have time for questions and answers later. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And
My
yeah,
pleasure.
I look forward to chatting more about your story after we hear from Kelly. And there was close to a segue a few minutes ago when you said something about you don't think we should have nuclear power. Kelly, you're going to mention something about nuclear power, right?
Always.
Okay. So let me show this so that the two people in the room, the three of us can see Kelly. Go ahead, Kelly. Introduce yourself and tell us your story.
Okay. Do I have, am I able to screen share? Do I have?
Well, let me make sure that you
Let's-
are. Thank you for that.
Zelda, I'm so sorry.
When you try to screen share, does it say you're available now for doing that?
Oh, yep.
And Kelly, you're based geographically where at this moment in time?
I am in northwestern Wisconsin. It is Ojibwe Anishinaabe land here.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, we're a couple hours south of Lake Superior. Just gonna put this on so you all can see it up close. This one. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so yeah, northern Midwest. I work with an organization called Nukewatch, and I was asked to speak about uranium mining and nuclear weapons waste and the important topics that are currently in the news. So thank you so much for inviting me. It was actually a really big challenge for me to prepare for this because of the topics I usually speak about or write about. Nukewatch has been around since 1979, and I've been working there for 9 years now. I am of European descent, and I was radicalized in the late 90s through the Catholic Workers and the Earth First movement. I lived in South America during when the war was still going on in Colombia, and I did accompaniment there. I was a Catholic worker for a few years, and then I've been back here and working with Nukewatch. Here is me and my family in New York.
You have three kids.
Yep,
Right.
there's 6, 8, and 11. We were at the second meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons last November.
Right.
My organization, we work against the entire fuel chain. Today, I want to focus on the new nuclear push that you, Zelda, you were just referring to that.
Yeah.
You're nuclear weapons at waste and things we can do. I know that you in Utah. I looked up some stuff about Utah since I knew who I would be speaking to today, and it was really interesting to learn that you have, and you might have more information than me, but at least 500 uranium mines there, probably mostly abandoned. The only operating uranium mill in the United States at White Mesa. You have the Northrop Grumman facility in Roy building parts for the land-based missile system. You have Fallout, which you have just shared in such an intimate, personal way,
Right.
About the truth about what happens. And now you've been left out of Rika again.
Yeah.
So you all have a
Well,
lot here.
It died in June.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So there's some work on it. So my part of my talk today is, if you look at the bottom of the screen, mining, and then the very end, if through the whole nuclear fuel chain, mining, milling, enrichment, and then it can either go to the reactor or go to make weapons, which isn't done here. And then either storage or disposal, and all of that's kind of a funny process because we've been working with nuclear for 7 decades, and we don't have a place for the waste. The two topics of uranium mining and nuclear weapons waste have a lot in common. As you said, also, they're invisible. It's radioactive violence. There are major impacts on human health, environmental disruption for hundreds of thousands or millions of years, a million years at least, because the longest lived radioactive material, the half-life, you multiply their half-life by 10 to find how long it's hazardous. And you've alluded to this, is there's really a disproportionate effect of radiation on women and children. So current issue.
I was not aware that it affected women more than men.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and also especially because when girls are born, we already have our eggs, and so that's one of the parts that's why it affects the second and third generation, and on our bodies it has a larger impact on our bodies. Since I was asked to talk about these things, I was just looking at what's all been going down. And if any of you are familiar with Kevin Camps, he works with Beyond Nuclear, and he has recently said that right now we're going through the largest nuclear push that he's ever experienced. And he's been working on this a lot longer than I have. So right now, just issues going on nationally and internationally are starting an increase for demand for uranium. Like you said, the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act. A lot of these had some great things going on in these acts, but unfortunately, they're a big handout to the nuclear industry. Last November at the climate conference, Biden, along with 21 other countries, promised to triple nuclear energy production before 2050. And this year, the price of uranium has hit a 16-year high. Uranium mines in the United States are reopening. It's been very, very low level of production the last few years because the prices were so low. They've gone back up. In March, the US stopped importing Russian uranium. Rika has sunset, which gives the nuclear industry just kind of a go ahead, like, okay, that's great. We don't have to pay for they know they don't have to pay for their mess. Price-Anderson Act was renewed, which is another subsidy, basically equivalent of billions of dollars a year to the nuclear industry, because it makes it so they aren't liable for their accidents. They have to pay only the first $13 billion if there were an accident. And but if you look at Fukushima cleaning up after that, the estimates are about 600 billion. So that means the rest of us are holding the bill. And then the Advance Act is also promoting more nuclear. So more uranium is being promoted by all of these policies. Oh, sorry. Oops, I have to go back first. Okay, so abandoned uranium mines. This is a map from the University of Stanford. 23,000 abandoned uranium mines is their estimates. You can see a lot of these are in Utah, and I'm sure you know a lot more about this than I do. Abandoned uranium mine means there's no requirement for these to be cleaned up and no funding to make that happen. And if someone could give me a time check, like at 10 minutes, that would be helpful.
I'll do
Because
that.
I don't have, thank you. So Zelda, I am not a frontline community directly impacted any more than everybody in the world is, because everybody is impacted by radioactive violence. And I am, but I'm very worried about, I guess I came into the anti-nuclear movement because I was able to meet Habakasha, and that I'd heard about Hiroshima, Nagasaki in history classes, and it was just part of history. But when I met Habakasha, it changed how I looked at the nuclear weapons, at the bomb, and I wanted to fight them forever. Other people haven't gotten into the anti-nuclear weapons movement in the same way, especially people who have dealt with uranium mines and maybe, other people who have been affected by fallout.
I have a quick question. There's a bunch from New Mexico and Arizona, mostly Native Americans, going to Washington, D.C., wanting to talk to Johnson on the 24th.
Oh, okay, great.
Oh,
For promoting RICA?
Yeah, so I just wondered if you were aware of it.
I wasn't. I thought there was one 1 or 2 months ago. Group
there
going up.
was, and this is
okay.
and they're getting on their bus tomorrow,
Oh, wonderful.
going back there. At least that's what I read on the internet today.
That's great. Yeah, that's actually one of my call to action points is people can continue to call Senator Johnson or Holly and pressure and your own representatives to promote the reauthorization plus the extension and expansion, which we need all of these things now. So this is something, this graphic was designed by the Radiation Monitoring Project. And this only speaks to uranium. It mimics estrogen and calcium, and it replaces calcium with radioactive uranium. It takes years for inhaled uranium to leave the lungs. The ingested uranium will end up in the bones, kidneys, and liver, but it can be absorbed faster in a newborn's digestive system. And this is what's happened. There was a study over the last few years called the Navajo birth cohort study that showed that babies being born on Navajo Nation are much more likely to be born with uranium in their body. Now, the last uranium mine was shut 20 years ago. Now they're starting up again as of this year.
Kelly, sorry, I forgot to tell you, you've been, just a time check, you've been going 11 minutes now. So
okay, thanks. Okay, so I want to share with you something. I'm going to go back in history, and we're going to look at some of how this has happened. I'm gonna have somebody. I'm bringing in a guest speaker. She's not live, but I'm gonna have a little piece of Leona Morgan's speech from a presentation she gave a couple.
For events, Tuesday.
Can
Recorded.
you hear the audio?
Columbus ran into us in 1492 and then went back to Europe and was like, hey, you know, there's all these things we could take, essentially. I wasn't there. I don't know what he said exactly. But this document, the Doctrine of Discovery, is something that was created specifically to justify the genocide, the theft, and the exploitation of our Mother Earth, as well as humans all over the world. And so the Doctrine of Discovery is still used as a basis for various policy in many colonized countries, even though it's not a legal document. So then moving forward to the formation of the United States and what they called the Indian problem. So the beginning of colonization here in New Mexico, we dealt a lot with the Spanish. And so that was one of our earlier colonizations, but later was the United States. And so various nations, you know, were impacted, you know, all over Turtle Island, North America, and then South America. You know, all of us had there were different colonizers and there were different impacts. And so a lot of it primarily, you know, coming from Western Europe. Right now, we're still dealing with those. I don't even know if they're if we can consider it. It's ongoing colonization. So it's not a history. If I say we're still dealing with the impacts of that history, that's not correct, because it's beyond. It's not history. It's today, and there's even plans into the future. There's so many plans for the continual theft and taking of our lands and our resources.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to share that part because it's key to something happening right now with the uranium prices going up. Uranium mines will be restarting all over the country. Leona during this presentation was speaking about the Pinyon Plain mine in next to the Grand Canyon, and it's 13 miles from the Colorado River. They started January 9th, I believe, mining, and her organization called Hall No has been monitoring, and they and the Navajo Nation was notified that they would be or that they actually had already started transportation of the uranium from the mine to the mill in White Mesa. The Navajo Nation sent out police. Share this. Okay, so right now, can you see my the video still or the PowerPoint?
No.
Okay. That they sent out police because the Navajo Nation has the rights and the sovereignty over their own land, which is actually a lot of land, and they do not permit radioactive transportation. That is a law that under Navajo Nation. So the police in the right picture, you can see the police escorted this semi with radioactive symbol on it that was hauling ore. And they escorted it off of their reservation, which is amazing.
Is that Navajo police or New Mexico or Utah police?
Navajo Nation.
Navajo Nation.
Arizona.
But the
Yeah.
Navajo police, so it's there.
So what happened? That was August 2nd, I believe, and there was in the left image you can see the protest on that side. The president of Navajo Nation worked also with the Arizona governor to temporarily pause this transportation. So right now There is no transportation of the uranium to the mill, which is an amazing success. And unfortunately, the plan is to restart it as soon as Navajo Nation is able to negotiate with the company Energy Fuels to set up regulations for monitoring fees, fines, and making sure that they're doing, if they're going to be transporting this waste there, or the uranium, that are going to be doing it as safe as possible. Because even though they're able to stop it by their own police, the United States government, federal government, still maintains that, and because of interstate commerce laws, they still have jurisdiction over Navajo Nation law, even though it might technically be illegal if they're actually following international treaties. So
2 minutes left.
2 minutes. Nuclear weapons waste.
We can bargain for more time if you've got like 5 minutes worth of stuff. We can still fit that in.
Okay.
Great presentation. So we'll go 5, everybody. Is that okay? Yep.
Okay, thank you. So this nuclear weapons waste. So this is what I had to separate, is the weapons waste from the civilian reactor waste, because I understand a lot more about civilian reactor. The weapons waste is treated different in many times from the reactor waste. This is a Department of Energy map, and it's not complete of where the waste is at, because it doesn't include private sites. You have a private site at Clive. I think I forgot to mention that earlier, and you probably know that for radioactive waste. Radioactive waste from weapons has killed so many people. The workers who have, let's say, is creating a nuclear weapon. Is that waste, or is that creating something? I'm not sure, but I would call it waste. Anyway, at least there have been tens of thousands of workers that have been killed from their work building weapons. And then a lot of those weapon sites are riddled with waste. Hanford is the biggest one. It was the site of the first nuclear reactor in the world. So Hanford's up here. Clive is over here in west. Oh, it's west of Salt Lake City, 80 miles.
Yes.
And WIP is listed here. WIP has had an accident 10 years ago, actually. You probably heard about that. They used the wrong kitty litter in the packing, and there was a major accident, shut it down for years. It's going again. It's accepting shipments of waste from a lot of different places, mostly Idaho National Lab, and they've had a lot of very shoddy work safety, some major problems with work safety. Okay, so I want to kind of jump ahead to the issues going on with nuclear weapons waste right now. So I think there's 2 major things. One is the depleted uranium. There is at Paducah, Kentucky. That's not on this map, and Portsmouth, Ohio. They have a lot of waste there, and they are deciding that the federal government's kind of trying to figure out a way to make this stuff get out or be processed or down blended in a cheaper way. And so they're trying to get rid of it and make it into weapons. And that is waste, turning it into weapons. And, well, they aren't saying it that way. They're saying that they want to sell it to a private company. And the other current issue that's been going on for a couple of years, it's been coming up and brewing, is called HALEU, high assay, low enriched uranium, is something that, okay, so that is something that they want to be using for advanced, what they call advanced nuclear reactors, to power them. And I don't think there are any being used so far. They haven't been, it's not being used yet in the US. It will be soon. One place opened in Wyoming, Bill Gates's place, TerraPower.
Mm.
but I don't know if it's actually, I know they're producing it in the United States, but it's almost weapons grade. And they want to use it in reactors for power, which is a big joke for so many reasons. And it's being made, that is being made at Oak Ridge and at Idaho National Labs. So those are the bigger issues going on, the more kind of new updates on weapons waste and how it's being used. So I just wanted to give you a few organizations that if you aren't, since you're already working with an organization, that's awesome. If you want to learn more, there are weapons waste organizations. A lot of them are right in the community, they're affected communities. And uranium impacted community organizations. I have those here. And as far as things you can do, Rika's already been mentioned. Have this email with all the information of who to contact and what to say if you want it simplified, if you want to speak to your representatives, and I will email that out, get that information out. There's also a walk being organized by the Mountain Ute, Saturday, October 12th at White Mesa, opposing the milling, spiritual walk and protest against Energy Fuels uranium mill.
Awesome.
So I can send you that information too. I don't know how many hours of a walk that is, or drive it is for you to get there. And keep updated. I would just recommend, since you're in Utah, keep updated on what the status of mines, because they're probably going to be reopening there. And I have a lot of resources. I can send those out. And this is my organization, Nukewatch. You can get more information from us here. And we have a newsletter that'll be coming out in a week, writing about all the newsy items along the whole nuclear fuel chain. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate that. And as you mentioned, it's the Utes that are doing the event on October 12th, which is formerly known as Columbus Day, currently called Indigenous Peoples Day. Here in so-called Utah, specifically Mill Creek, we're on Shoshone and Goshute land. And sorry, I forgot to give that land acknowledgement earlier. I really appreciate, Zelda, what you've been able to talk about. And I know that we still have like 10 minutes left before we have to leave this physical site here in the library. Go ahead.
After I wrote my book, I found 2 other girls who had been born without eyes.
In Utah, or so-called Utah.
No, Utah. One was,
oh yeah,
I was told to read this book, and this little girl was born without eyes. And this is her, she's gonna play here. That's her and her mother. Right now, she's still alive. She's a professor. Her brain developed. And she and her mother both wrote part of this book, in this book. And then
Hanford plaintiff.
Yeah,
By
that's
Tricia
in
Pitkin.
Hanford. Hanford, Washington.
Tricia Pitkin was also one of the people at one of our events when we did with Leona Morgan a couple January.
Oh, was she?
Yeah. We have that on our YouTube. I can send that to you so you can see her.
Yeah, she's won a lot of awards with this book. And when I went up to Barnes Noble to buy it, and they had to order it. And when it came in, the lady said, I mean, you go through, there's won about 60 awards worldwide. And the sales lady said, we don't get very many calls for this book. It's kind of sad. And then working with you, Rika and so forth, I found another one with Tina Cordova down in New Mexico. She said, I know a lady that was born without eyes. And her mother, uh, her mother was exposed to Trinity. Her mother's no longer alive, but her mother had been exposed to Trinity, and she was born without eyes, but her brain had developed also. So we have one from the state of Washington, and one from New Mexico, and one from Utah, all exposed to different radiation
Right.
that were born without eyes. And so regarding my daughter, my brother Carl, and he's has a bladder infection, cancer. He and his friend Brent Agard, were out west. They were going to get really, really rich. They were going to find an empty mine that was full of uranium. Well, they took a Geiger counter out there, and yeah, they found a little bit of stuff in this mine that was abandoned, and they gave their Geiger counter to their girlfriends outside. And when they came out of the mine, the girl said, "Look at these cow pies. They're just full of radiation." And I got to thinking about that. He said, "I know exactly when it was. It was 1954, right after graduation. They graduated in Milford in the end of May. And he says it was the first part of June. And I got to thinking about it, and I told him, I said, "Carl, that was when I was 6 weeks along with Elaine."
Right. I was just going to ask that, what the name of that test was, or the date
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah, 1954. She was born in February of 55.
Right.
So I was 6 weeks along with her when that, and I said, "Can I put it in my book?" And he said, "Yes." So I've added the two girls and got the second edition, two girls and Carl's telling about me. And so I've got a second edition.
Yeah. Yeah. Today is the 40 years ago today is when folks in San Francisco called this the World Peace Day.
Yeah.
So that's why that's one reason we're doing this today. But also, I just realized recently that the first underground nuclear test in Nevada, when they started doing that, it was in 1957 on September 19th, a few days ago, was the anniversary of the first underground, because that became the thing to do starting in 1962, when the first major treaty stopped all the above ground atmospheric tests. So they already had some practice from 1957 to 62 to be able to do full-scale nuclear bombs in Nevada underground, allegedly trying to keep the radiation from getting out too much. But as we know, that they vented anyway.
Stay under the ground.
Right, yeah. And some of the tests went
Yeah,
off.
they wanted to restart that later on.
Mhm.
And that time we had Matheson as our representative.
Oh, yeah.
And they were asking for input from the public. So I took up a little brief thing about this, and I got a nice letter from Matheson. He said they did not start it.
As we go on through the years, the decades, there's fewer and fewer people that are still working at the labs and the nuclear test site that actually got to see any full-scale tests. So they're all only doing it through computer simulation and through the subcritical tests that have been going on since 1997, where they use actual fissile material, but they don't get a full-scale chain reaction. So it's a bombus interruptus of sorts, where you can only get the little bits of fission happening, but not self-sustained chain reaction. And that way they put that into the computers and keep the addiction to the science going, so people can be ready to do full-scale tests again, so that we can continue to have nuclear weapons forever. That is the cornerstone of the US foreign policy, is to make sure we have powerful nuclear weapons to be able to rule the world. And so it's probably going to take the fall of the US empire, because it's harder for people to have personal revolutions in their hearts, including throughout the whole political system with the scientists and the engineers, the system, the money makers, all this 90 billion that's being spent globally, everybody that's got a stake in this of wanting to keep their jobs and keep money flowing to their companies is going to keep the nuclear cycle going, and eventually there will be full-scale testing in Nevada again. That's what's going to happen, whether it's Project 2025 under Republicans or some other project under the Republicans or under the Democrats. The energy is there.
Talking about building out nuclear.
Could I make a comment for a
Yes,
moment?
please. Yes.
The Deseret News recently has had all these op-eds about the American public need to be informed about the war danger. And I wrote an op-ed to the Deseret News about that, and I'm going to send that to you, to your organization, because this letter refers, the op-ed refers to the National Defense Strategy Commission, and it has put out a report this July, 132 pages, that basically says the U.S. has to get ready to wage a war in the Middle East against Russia and China, a nuclear war.
Yeah.
And it's an unbelievable document of what our Congress is considering in terms of funding the nuclear arms race. And I will send what I wrote to the Deseret News to you, and you can look up that report. The tragedy is I have written to Biden and to Romney, and with all the danger of nuclear war with Russia, and they're all in total denial that we have a danger of World War III with all this nuclear arms racing that's going on right now. It's a worldwide arms race, and that's what's fueling the revival of all this mining, nuclear mining, and so on. It's our own people in our, as you say, in our government that are fueling basically the destruction of the human race. Because if we have World War III, it's going to be a disaster. So I'll send you the reference.
I really appreciate that, Andy. We always need to keep sharing as much information as we can, and I'm so glad that the two of us, the two of you that are here, not counting myself, because I'm leaving physically Utah soon, that you're going to continue to be part of these meetings with me, and anybody else that wants to come. And Betty is able to join us because all the meetings are Zoom now. I'm very grateful, Kelly, for your presence here and the presentation that you did. And the people that aren't here, like Deb Sawyer and others that used to be part of this, that kept this Utah campaign to abolish nuclearism started and going. And so we have to keep going. We have to keep telling these stories so that some people will get those revolutions of their heart and be inspired. And so hopefully some of those people are pulling the strings on the money to stop it, to slow it down. I mean, stopping it completely is great, but it's generally a practical thing. Is like slowing it down first is what usually happens. And the Republicans and the Democrats are not going to do that. It's up to us, the non-politicians, to do that. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Betty, for joining us. And we got a vigil coming up this Thursday at Northrop Grumman. That's the 26th, at least. Betty and I will be there. Kelly, do you have any final words? I know we're short on time. The library is going to be kicking us out first. Or does anybody have any other questions for Kelly? Because it was a great presentation. Maybe there's slides that we missed that we didn't have time for that we could put on our website. But does anybody have any specific questions for Kelly or any last words from Kelly?
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for your work down there. It's great. It was great to learn about your groups, and I know there's Heal Utah too, and good work going on down there.
Yeah. Doug, do you have anything to say about the Union of Concerned Scientists or the?
No, but
the
I there's going to be, Senator McGovern is having a call to action on September 26th, hearings in Congress on this issue.
Good.
that?
In Congress, the
In
US
Congress.
Congress. Yeah. September 26th. Right, because that is
It's coming up in a few days.
that's the UN declared that probably about 10 years ago. I'm not sure when, the International Day for the complete elimination of nuclear weapons. It's a very long name, and that's why we've chosen that date for going up to Northrop Grumman again. And so whatever activism we can do, whatever methods we can use to help spread the word, inspire people, educate. Thank you again, Andy. What's the name of that document again before we go? Did you have it? You're going to send it to us, I know, but
Yeah, it's the National Defense Strategy Commission report on our military strategy that we need to have. And
okay.
it's a complete document of basically hegemonic control of the U.S. of the world's supply of nuclear weapons. And we should be ready to fight wars with both China and Russia at the same time, and even in the Middle East.
Yeah.
We need to spend many more billions or trillions of dollars
Yeah.
to for the U.S. to basically control the world, and it's a frightening document. It's scary.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yep, let's all keep up the good work. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good night. Nice to see you all.
You. Who are you talking to?